Arcadian Vanguard presents The Wrestling News in your daily wrestling newscast for Wednesday, December 7th, 2022. Good morning, I'm Mike Sempervive. We begin with NXT, broadcast live last night on the USA Network. The episode was the go-home show leading into Saturday's Deadline Premium Live event and featured an appearance by Xavier Woods and Kofi Kingston of The New Day, who arrived to challenge NXT Tag Team Champions Pretty Deadly to a match at Deadline.
But boys, the story that we want to hear talks about who you're going to be defending those titles against this Saturday at Deadline.
Because you said you beat everybody, right? You beat everybody already, right? That's what you said.
Everybody. Well. They beat everybody except your boys, the New Day.
In two wildcard triple threat matches, the final participants were determined for the first ever men's and women's Iron Survivor Challenge matches that will take place at Deadline. One match saw Axiom defeat Von Wagner and Andre Chase. He is now set to join Grayson Waller, Joe Gacy, Carmelo Hayes, and J.D. McDonough in the men's Iron Survivor Challenge. The second triple threat had Indy Hartwell emerging victorious over Wendy Chu and Fallon Henley. She'll join Zoe Stark, Cora Jade, Roxanne Perez, and Kiana James Saturday night. The winners of the two Iron Survivor matches will be the respective number one contenders for the NXT Men's and Women's Championships. Tony D'Angelo returned to action on NXT, defeating Zion Quinn in his first televised match since being sidelined last September with a knee injury. In other results, Isla Dawn pinned Thea Hale, Josh Briggs and Brooks Jensen defeated Edris Enofe and Malik Blade, and Charlie Dempsey beat Hank Walker via submission. In ratings news, the third and final hour of this week's Monday Night Raw drew the smallest audience of any hour in the 30-year history of the show, according to Showbuzz Daily, with an average viewership on USA Network over the 3 hours of 1.536 million, down nearly 8% from last week's episode. The third-hour audience was 1.263 million, a loss of one-fifth of the viewership from Hour 2's 1.596 million. The second hour was down from the 1.748 million who tuned in for Hour 1. Overall, the show lost 36% of its audience from start to finish. In the key 18 to 49-year-old demographic, Raw was actually slightly up from last week, drawing a .41 rating, equating to about 535,000 viewers, an improvement from last week's .40, according to WrestleNomics. The episode came in at number 6 for the evening in the key demo on cable TV, even with last week. The Monday Night Football game between the Saints and the Buccaneers on ESPN led the night in both the key demo and in overall viewership on cable. Post Wrestling reports that in Canada, Raw averaged 180,500 viewers and 79,300 in the 25 to 54-year-old demographic on Rogers Sportsnet 360. Both numbers are down from last week. In injury news, Drew McIntyre reported on Twitter Monday that he'd been medically disqualified from appearing this Friday night on SmackDown alongside Sheamus to challenge the Usos for the tag team title, stemming from a legitimate injury, the nature of which hasn't been publicly disclosed. McIntyre has been away from the ring for this week and last week's TV tapings. He's expected to be back in action in time for WWE's post-Christmas house show tour, according to a report yesterday from Wrestling Observer Radio. In more NXT news, the first NXT Premium Live event of 2023 will be the third annual NXT Vengeance Day, according to a report yesterday from PW Insider. The event is scheduled to take place on Saturday, February 4th at the Spectrum Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. The original Vengeance pay-per-view event was presented by WWE from 2001 to 2007 and brought back once more in 2011. The 2006 edition was also held at the Spectrum Center and was the highest attended WWE event ever held in that building. In other WWE news, the company will hold its first event in India in 5 years next month at the 5,000-seat Gachibowli Indoor Stadium in Hyderabad, India, according to a PW Insider report. The show is scheduled for Wednesday, January 18th, and will reportedly be taped for both the local Indian market and for streaming on Peacock and the WWE Network. The show will be a SmackDown-branded event, No matches have been announced as of yet. Independent wrestlers Kylie Rae and Casey Navarro were among those given private tryouts by the company this week at the WWE Performance Center in Orlando, Florida, according to a report in PW Insider. Rae was part of AEW's original women's division back in 2019, but departed the company after the first Double or Nothing pay-per-view. She has since worked in Impact in the NWA, challenging Camille for the NWA Women's World title last March at the 2022 Crockett Cup event. Navarro finished up a stint with MLW last June and has been working the independent circuit since, last appearing on a Northeast Wrestling card in Bethany, Connecticut in mid-October. Scouting of independent talent was a common practice for NXT during Paul Levesque's original period running the brand, but had been discontinued earlier this year when Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard were in charge prior to Levesque's return to power in July. In MLW news, MLW star Richard Holliday revealed in an interview with Justin Barrasso of Sports Illustrated yesterday that he's been diagnosed with stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma. The diagnosis took place last July when Holliday, real name Joe Zimbardi, checked himself into Bridgeport's St. Vincent's Hospital after experiencing several weeks of dizzy spells and other health issues. He's currently midway through 12 rounds of chemotherapy treatment. Holliday was hopeful in the interview about a return to wrestling, stating, quote, "I think about my return every single day. I'd be lying if I said I didn't, but this is a process. I know there are more steps after chemotherapy. Mentally right now, I am ready. Physically, I know it's going to take some time, but I will be back." End quote. Holliday's last match was against MLW World Champion Alexander Hammerstone last June at Battle Riot 4. In NWA news, the National Wrestling Alliance will present the first ever live episode of NWA Power on January 31st at the Knoxville Convention Center in Knoxville, Tennessee, according to a Twitter announcement made on Monday. The announcement of the show's main event is expected soon. NWA Power has run as a pre-taped show since it began in September of 2019, streaming on both YouTube and Fight TV. In Mexico, CMLL ran their weekly Tuesday night cards at both Arena Coliseo Guadalajara and Arena Mexico. Magia Blanca defeated Angel Rebelde in Guadalajara to retain the national welterweight title, while at Arena Mexico, Sagrado made the first defense of the national heavyweight title that he won back in October, defeating Star Black. Turning to Japan, New Japan's Shingo Takagi returned to the promotion where he became a star, making a surprise appearance during Dragon Gate's show at Korakuen Hall on Monday. It was announced that Takagi would team with BB Hulk on Christmas night in Fukuoka against Yamato and Madoka Kikuta as part of the company's final show of the year. Takagi began his career as part of Dragon Gate's Crazy Max stable in 2004 and remained there until 2018 when he departed for New Japan Pro Wrestling. Final Gate 2022 on Christmas night will also feature an Open the Dream Gate title match between champion Yuki Yoshioka and former champion Ben Kay. The main event of yesterday's Dragon Gate show, which aired for free on its streaming service, saw Yoshioka defeat Masaki Mochizuki to make the fourth defense of his championship. As we go to air, New Japan's Super Junior Tag League, All Japan's Real World Tag League, and Stardom are all running shows. We'll have any relevant results in tomorrow's update. Turning to Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the magazine revealed its Tag Team 100 listing Monday night as part of the release of its digital version of the February 2023 issue, with undisputed WWE Tag Team Champions the Usos topping the list at number 1. Rounding out the rest of the top 10 were, in order, AAA, IWGP, and ROH champs FTR, the Briscoe Brothers, AEW Trios champs Death Triangle, Fukuoka Double Crazy, RK Bro, Gallows and Anderson, the Young Bucks, the Hex, and Violence is Forever. Some on social media specifically questioned the choice to rank the Usos the number 1 team above FTR. Speaking with the Wrestling News, Pro Wrestling Illustrated editor-in-chief Kevin McElvaney explained the decision.
To me, it was always a 2-team race, and I haven't seen too many people try to argue anything to the contrary. FTR, essentially, you could say they're the premier act in their promotion, but they haven't been treated like it. They've been booked, essentially, as if they're being kept away from the big one, from the AEW title. That's the AEW World Tag title, regardless of any other prizes that FTR holds is presented as the most important within that promotion. And I think there's a perception that until they are back at that level, it's hard to justify saying that they're the number one team in the world.
This is the third annual installment of PWI's list of the top tag teams in the business, which began in 2020 as the Tag Team 50. In the interest of transparency, we note that the Wrestling News' Brian R. Solomon is a member of PWI's editorial staff and was part of the Tag Team 100 selection committee. And before we leave you today, we'd like to remind you that however you consume your content, you can find the Wrestling News 24 hours a day and 7 days a week across social media. On Twitter, follow us at Wrestling News AV. Our Facebook page is also Wrestling News AV. The Wrestling News can also be found on the Arcadian Vanguard YouTube page. And for those who utilize Amazon Echo devices, just tell Alexa to play the Wrestling News podcast. And remember to make sure you add podcast at the end. Once again, for daily updates, breaking news, and more, follow the Wrestling News across social media. And that's the news for today. If anything happens, we will be here to tell you about it. No clickbait, no paywall, just the Wrestling News. The Wrestling News is a division of Arcadian Vanguard, and the Wrestling Newscast is a production of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network.